Welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Bell Healthcare Marketing. I'm Chuck Adams, and today we'll be discussing how to maximize practice revenue by converting more lead inquiries into new patients and procedures. I am really excited to introduce today's guest, Mara Shorr. She's a partner with Shorr Solutions, an award-winning medical consulting firm that assists practices improve their operational, administrative, and financial performance. She's also an award-winning executive, well-known author, and speaker in the aesthetic healthcare space. Mara has a wealth of experience in helping practices maximize revenue growth. Mara, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, so Mara, new patients are obviously the lifeblood of really any practice that's looking to grow. And when a potential new patient calls or emails or messages a practice, what happens next can really have a significant impact on overall practice revenue. So we're excited for you to share your knowledge with our audience about how lead intake and lead nurturing can maximize practice revenue. So first, tell us what lead intake is and why a practice should care about it.
So I think that what we find, so at Shorr Solutions, we work with practices all over the country. So this isn't necessarily one geographic specific thing, but we work with practices across the country. And what we see so often is that a website company, so whether it's Bell Media or if they're for some reason with a different website company, but their website company works really, really hard to focus on SEO and to focus on actually getting that lead. However, what happens when that lead comes to the practice is really make or break. So practice spends money every month on a PPC campaign, on their Instagram, on any sort of social media, their SEO, etc. But what happens then is that when a lead comes in, and we know that could be a phone call, it could be someone filling out a contact us form, it could be a live chat on their website, it could be a DM or a real self message or any of those things. What needs to happen is that somebody from the practices team needs to be available to that patient to respond to that question and respond to that lead ASAP. So we need to make sure, number one, that they don't go to voicemail, that they, just because the practice is at lunch, we've seen this happen, they say, oh, well, everyone's at lunch. We recommend staggering your lunch breaks. As much as we love team camaraderie, stagger those lunch breaks. And have someone available after hours on an on-call basis, have a team member available so that they aren't leaving a voicemail. We need to know that if they are coming in via a contact us form, if they're coming in via a live chat, that is answered right away. And by right away, we don't mean within 24 hours. So I would say really that needs to be answered. If it's a live chat, it needs to be answered in real time. And if it's a contact us request, honestly, that needs to be answered within 15, 20 minutes, because what happens is they're going to go on to the next website after that, and whoever gets a hold of them and calls them back first is going to win that lead and is going to win that patient. And so, Chuck, then to answer the second part of your question, is that everyone in the practice needs to have several components when they're answering the lead. They need to be positive. And so answer that phone with a smile. You can hear the smile over the phone, or you can hear someone that's really grumpy over the phone, right? They need to be knowledgeable, and they need to keep in mind that that lead isn't just necessarily fact-finding. That lead is a sales opportunity. So you want to make sure you're asking that patient as far as, do they have any other questions? And if they don't have any other questions, then at the end of the call, you make sure and give them the next available, I would say 2 appointments. So instead of saying, do you have any other questions? Okay, thanks, click. It then becomes, so if you don't have any other questions, we do have an appointment available on Monday at 10 a.m. or Thursday at 3 p.m. Which of those work best for you? You need to make sure that you get all of the patient's contact information during that lead. So name, address, phone number, email, spelling, make sure that's all correct, garbage in, garbage out, and make sure you're calling them by the name during the whole call. And those are really, if we say like the basics of appropriate lead intake, those are some of the basics of things that need to happen with every single lead intake.
Yeah, I think We absolutely agree. That's one of the biggest challenges we see with new clients is really around their lead intake practices, process, or program. So can you share some of the challenges that you see with practices surrounding lead intake, some of the most common challenges?
Yeah, we find that, you know, a lot of these things that the steps that we're recommending, they aren't being done, and there's holes in the system. And so, for example, if you aren't getting the patient's phone number and confirming is this the best phone number to call you back in case we get disconnected? If you don't get that information and call them back if the phone gets disconnected, then that's a mislead opportunity. We've actually had that happen. We were in a practice once. We had just gotten done reviewing this. And so the next call that came in, she took all that information, and sure enough, the call gets dropped. And she looked at me and said, "So now what do I do?" And I said, "You call them back." You ask them for the best phone number in case the call gets disconnected. The call got disconnected. Now you call them back. So you also need to make sure that when the actual lead comes in, that you are, like I said, you're collecting all of this information and that you're utilizing all of this information to drive the conversation. So you want to make sure that the person answering the phone is knowledgeable at an FAQ level, right? A frequently asked question level about each of the procedures. Your patient should not know your website better than your team. So your team needs to be knowledgeable about all of the information that's on the website, because if the patient says to a team member, "Oh, I saw this on your website," and the team member doesn't know what you're talking about, it doesn't look good for the whole practice. So when we look at some of those commonly missed opportunities, it's not knowing the FAQ, not collecting all the contact information, and not actually treating it as a sales opportunity.
Yeah, some of the things you mentioned are really second nature if you're in a sales or a marketing environment, but really can feel foreign if you're in the practice setting. Mm-hmm. So that's some good insight on lead intake, which I think is really, really important. Speed to lead, how quickly you respond is really important. There are statistics out there that imply that 70% of all sales that happen go to the first person who the actual customer talks with. So that's really great. Let me ask you this. What are some things, so let's say that we've gotten a good intake system in place. What are some things that a practice should put in place to nurture those leads to really maximize that call to procedure conversion rate?
So there's several things. Number one, because we look at the entire conversion, really with the conversion cascade, and we look at the entire cycle. So when we look at where that patient cycle starts, it's where Bell Media comes in, right? It's making the patient aware of the practice. And that is, like we said, it could be a referral, it could be SEO, PPC, social media, et cetera. So those are your marketing channels. Once the practice then has that patient inquiry, which we talked about, that the lead actually comes in, it becomes the practice's job to convert them into an appointment. Now, two things happen. Either that person does come in for that appointment / consult, right? Or they don't. And so the job always is to convert that lead, not just to a consult, but the practice's job is to convert them to a treatment. And so that's where, because the money isn't necessarily in the consult, the money's in the treatment, even for practices that charge for a consult. So we always recommend making sure, number one, that every single lead is in your email marketing system. And so they should all be in, whether it's Constant Contact, MailChimp, if you work with a different company that has a more proprietary system, whatever that system is, make sure that that email lead is in there so that in the course of them making their decision, they're still engaged with the practice, even if it's on a bit of a more subliminal level. But if you have somebody that comes in and either they don't come in and they are at that point on the fence about booking that consult, or they come in for a consult and don't book the treatment, whether it's a surgical or a non-surgical treatment, we need to make sure that there is somebody designated in the practice that will continue to follow up with that lead. And they need to continue to follow up with that lead unless the patient gives the practice a hard no. So I will not do this procedure because I am not medically a candidate, for instance. Mm-hmm. So I am not able to get off of my blood thinners for this surgical procedure. I have a heart condition that prohibits this. So we need to look at that. Or maybe that's just the treatment they came in for was just not going to resolve the issue that they wanted to solve. So otherwise, we need to make sure that there is a patient care coordinator or somebody with such a position that is able to continue communication when it comes to communicating with that patient, following up. Have you had time to actually think about this? And I would like to continue the conversation. I'm following up with you because when we last spoke, you said you needed time to consult with a spouse, think about it, review your finances, check your calendar for your next vacation, etc. And have you had time to do that? And I'm now following up. And what additional questions do you have? These were your concerns, and we're here to continue the conversation. And so we want to make sure that that person in the practice continues to follow up with that lead. And I always recommend that we find out, how does the patient want to be communicated with? And if they say, oh, it doesn't matter, or I'm flexible, communicate with them on several different platforms. So somebody that likes to be maybe be communicated with by phone, so of maybe a particular generation or just a particular preference, that person does not respond as well to emails or text messages. Versus if you have somebody that says, I hate the phone, then that's where you can follow up with them through different sources, making sure that they're all HIPAA compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we always talk about, we want to engage with our customers in the way that's most convenient to them, what they're most comfortable with. And I think, once you've got a really solid lead intake, lead nurturing is very important. Just because someone doesn't make the decision today, that doesn't mean that they're not going to make the decision in 2 months, 3 months,
Correct.
or 6 months. So that's really, really insightful information. Finally, are there any other recommendations you would make to practices about how they should go about improving their lead intake or lead nurturing systems?
Having a good system in place is going to be key. I've seen so many instances where somebody has, the patient care coordinator says, oh, well, I keep a notebook, right? I keep a notebook next to my desk. That's not how, number one, you want to make sure you are considering HIPAA compliance. Number two, that's always first and foremost, we want to make sure patient safety and patient privacy is key. But what I also recommend is that you look at an electronic system to track everything. What some practices are more comfortable with, an Excel spreadsheet kept in a secure location on the practice's server. Some practices utilize a system that is involved with their EMR or their EHR system. Mm-hmm. Some practices use a third-party management tool that is HIPAA compliant, and so something that is more sales or more project management based. Whichever your comfort level, there needs to be a system for two reasons. Number one, to make sure that those follow-ups are actually happening, and so upper management can actually check and make sure. And number two, that if something happens with the original person that was actually in charge of this, any other person in the practice should be able to step in at any moment and know exactly where things left off. And that's incredibly important. So having a good, solid system is something that I see a lot. It doesn't happen a lot. And we work really hard to implement that with our clients, is making sure there's a good system.
Yeah, having a process to make sure you've got consistent follow-up is really critical. Mara, thanks so much for your insight on how practices can maximize
You're
revenue
welcome.
growth with a robust lead management process. I'm sure this content's going to be really, really valuable for our audience. And good luck to you and your team, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, they are more than welcome to contact us at shorrsolutions.com. We are always happy to help practices through it.
Thanks, Mara. We really appreciate it.